Kansas, America's favorite progressive rock band, just blew through Las Vegas for a performance, and yours truly was there. We are going to talk about it. Hey there, SwanShadow here. Welcome back to the nest. So this was my, and I lose track, 7th, I think, Kansas concert, going all the way back to 1980 when I saw them for the first time. For this particular tour, this is December 2025, they've had some lineup changes. So this is the first time I've seen this particular ensemble together on stage. This is also the first time I've seen the band with none of the founding members on stage. The two founding members that are still connected to the band, Phil Ehart, the drummer, is not touring currently because he's recovering from a heart attack that he had a couple of years ago. Richard Williams, the guitar player, has not been touring lately, also due to some health-related issues and that sort of thing. So this is a completely rebuilt Kansas lineup. But I have to say, they still sound great, and most importantly, still faithful to the music. Now, the current lineup includes Ronnie Platt on lead vocals and keyboards. Ronnie's been the lead singer since Steve Walsh retired in 2014. So he's been with the band for a little over a decade now. You also have Zach Rizvi on lead and rhythm guitars and backing vocals. Zach goes back to 2016 with Kansas, though he took a couple of years away a while back, but came back to the band last year and is back to being a full-time member. Tom Brislin is on keyboards, lead and backing vocals, formerly a member of Yes. He's been in the band since 2018. Joe Denenzone is now the violinist. He also plays rhythm guitar and sings some backing vocals. Joe replaced a longtime stalwart David Ragsdale in that particular role, who of course replaced the great Robbie Steinhardt. Eric Holmquist is in the drum seat now for Phil Ehart. Eric has been the band's longtime drum tech, and he's played off and on filling in for Mr. Ehart over the course of last several years, but he's been really the full-time drummer for the last 2 or 3 years. Then you have the two brand new guys to the band. Dan McGowan is now the bass player. He also sings backing vocals as well as some lead vocals. He replaced longtime member Billy Greer last year. And also brand new to the band is Scott Bernard, the longtime touring guitar player for Kenny Loggins. I think they said he was with Kenny for like 18 years, but he's now the primary guitarist along with Zach Rizvi, filling the role that Rich Williams would normally perform. So that's the current composition of Kansas. This particular show was at the Palms Hotel and Casino in the Pearl Concert Theater here in Las Vegas. I love going to a show at the Pearl. You hear people say a lot about different venues, there's not a bad seat in the house. That really is true of the Pearl. It's a terrific venue to see a show, and the sound system is usually pretty good, as it was on this particular occasion. This show ran for about an hour and a half, maybe a little less. That's typical of casino shows here in Las Vegas. They usually like to limit acts to 90 minutes so they can get people back out on the floor spending their money. Kansas did 15 songs, including a 1-song encore. It was a really excellent set in terms of the performance, a little less so in terms of the song selection, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But as far as the band's concerned, I've never heard Kansas in any combination be anything less than fantastic as far as the musicianship is concerned. And that's definitely true of the band that they're putting on the stage right now. Absolutely terrific in terms of musicianship. Ronnie Platt does a great job on lead vocals. No, he's not Steve Walsh. Nobody is Steve Walsh, who was probably one of the 10 best vocalists in the history of rock when he was in his prime. Of course, those of us who saw Steve in the latter years of his time with Kansas know that he wasn't even Steve Walsh the last maybe 15 years or so. But Ronnie does an excellent job. He sounds just enough like Steve that the songs sound like Kansas, but he doesn't sound like he's doing an imitation or an impression of Steve. He sings with his own natural voice, but there's enough similarity in tone that the songs sound like you expect Kansas to sound. So, and Ronnie's a great front man. He brings a ton of energy and enthusiasm. So I've always enjoyed seeing the band with him in the lead vocal spot. He's also a terrific keyboard player. So you have that going for him as well. As far as the music, the selection of the material for this particular set, like I said, 15 songs, including the encore. They kicked off the show with Point of No Return, which is as good a place to start a Kansas show as any. I love that song, and they did it really, really well. Kansas has always done a good job of putting together sets that honor the band's history. There's always music covering the entire range of the band's albums, going all the way back to the self-titled debut. And this show was no exception. For example, the second song was What's on My Mind from Left Overture, which is, well, their other best-known album along with Point of No Return. But then we got a couple of songs from that period in the 1980s, which is, to be honest, probably my least favorite period in the history of Kansas. We got the two big hits from that time frame, Play the Game Tonight from the album Vinyl Confessions, and then Fight Fire with Fire from the album Drastic Measures. I'm not crazy about either of those two songs or the albums that they come from, to be honest. But those were big radio hits, and I understand why they play them. They're two of the Kansas hits that still get a lot of play on classic rock radio. But if they left one or both of those songs out of the set, I, for one, would not be disappointed. Again, that's a part of Kansas history that I would be totally fine not hearing anything from that when I go to see them in concert. The next song was brand new to the set list, Jets Overhead, which comes from the album The Absence of Presence, which is their most recent album. It was released in 2021. I have to admit, I don't absolutely love this song. They did it really well, and I understand why they chose it. It's featuring something from their most recent album, and you want to get those album sales going and encourage people to go check out that record. But as far as the songs on that particular album, this is not one of the ones I would choose to hear in a live performance. The last two tours, when I saw them, they performed Throwing Mountains, which is from that same album. Now that's a terrific song, and it's one that really translates well to the live show. If we're gonna have a song from Absence of Presence in the show, I personally would much rather that it be Throwing Mountains than Jets Overhead. But the thing that really annoyed me about Jets Overhead joining the set list is that they used it to replace my all-time favorite Kansas song, which is Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel. That song has been a staple of their concert set for years and years and years. They took it out of the set to put Jets Overhead in. And I don't love that, because Born on Wings of Steel is my favorite Kansas song of all time, and not hearing it in the concert set was a bit disappointing, to say the least, particularly since they replaced it with a song I'm not all that crazy about. I like it, but I don't love it. But be that as it may, it was fine for what it is. Then they reached back deep into the catalog for some songs from the 70s albums, Child of Innocence, The Wall, and Song for America. Those were all terrific songs that remind you that Kansas is America's premier progressive rock band. In all of those songs, we get a lot of progressive textures. It's very intricate musicality. In fact, Ronnie Platt introduced Song for America by saying, this is probably the hardest song in the entire Kansas catalog to play. And I can believe that. But it's a song that bears hearing. It's a great performance piece. It showcases just the sheer talent of the band. Following that set, they did Dust in the Wind. And I don't think contractually they can do a song without playing Dust in the Wind, so they did it here. But that's okay. I love that song. Joe Denonzon did some terrific violin work on that one. So they played it, and there it is. They followed that with Can I Tell You, which was the very first Kansas single from the very first Kansas album in 1974. Now that's a good, solid rocker. It's a look back at where Kansas started. And as I said, the band's always done a good job of honoring their entire history by playing songs in the performance set that cover their whole discography. So there was a callback to the very, very beginning. Next up in the set was Hold On from Audio Visions, the 1980 album, which I regard as the last album of the classic period of Kansas. Now, I know some Kansas fans end the classic period one album before with Monolith from 1979, but for me, Audio Visions is right there with all of the 1970s albums. Hold On is a song that I used to love seeing Steve Walsh sing in concert. It was a great showcase for his voice. And Ronnie Platt does justice to it. But if there's one song in the set where I really most miss Steve's voice, it's on Hold On. Like I said, Ronnie does a fine job singing it, but it's the one song that really reminds me how much I miss early period Steve Walsh before his voice started to go downhill. The next song was Down the Road, which they dedicated to Robbie Steinhardt, the band's founding violinist and vocalist, who sang the lead on that particular number originally. Then they ramped up for the climax with Portrait He Knew from Point of No Return. It's always a song I enjoy hearing because, again, it's one of my favorite songs from my favorite Kansas album. And they concluded the set with Miracles Out of Nowhere, which has been their closing number for quite some years, at least on tours when they're not focusing on doing the entirety of one particular album. When they're doing one of their more general set lists, they usually close with Miracles Out of Nowhere. This one featured vocals by Dan McGowan, who's the newish bass player who replaced Billy Greer. I have to say I'm not as enthusiastic about Dan as a lead vocalist compared to Billy. Billy was a really strong singer who did most of the parts that Robbie Steinhardt used to sing when he was in the band. And just to my ear anyway, Billy was a better singer, I think, than Dan is. Dan did a solid job, but that was the song where I really missed hearing Billy. And then, of course, the encore was Carry On Wayward Son, as you would expect. It's one of the two songs in the set they're probably obligated by contract to perform, and as always, they did a fantastic job with it. So the set list was a real mix of Kansas favorites and some older deep cuts from the band's catalog. And overall, it was an outstanding show. As I've said earlier, one of the things that always impresses me about Kansas, every version of the band that I've ever seen perform, is the musicality of the talent in the band. And some of the guys who've joined the band over the last couple of years, last several years really, like Tom Breslin, who's an incredible keyboard player, as you would expect for somebody who used to be in Yes. Joe Denenzone, the new violinist. I mean, he's a man on fire in terms of his violin playing. This is the first time I've seen Kansas since Joe joined the band, and I was really impressed with his violin playing, as well as his occasional support on rhythm guitar. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is having Zach Risby back in the band, and now having Scott Bernard taking over for Rich Williams. Then you have Joe Denenzone, who plays rhythm guitar on the songs where he's not playing violin. This is really the first time in quite a while that Kansas has been able to put three powerhouse guitarists on stage for their performances. And man, it makes a difference in the sound. I've seen them over the years where they only had Rich Williams playing lead and then being supported by David Ragsdale, who, like Joe Denenzone, would play rhythm guitar when he wasn't playing violin. And those performances just missed a little bit of extra oomph. But now they have two fantastic lead guitar players who can switch off doing lead or rhythm or alternate lead with Joe playing rhythm guitar, and it just lights up the sound. The guitar sound on this performance was as good as I've ever heard from Kansas. Eric Holmquist does a good job filling in on drums for Phil Ehart, but we all know Phil Ehart is probably the most underrated drummer in the history of rock music. People don't appreciate what an amazing drummer Phil Ehart is. And so that's a guy that's really hard to replace. His drum parts are both intricate and incredibly powerful. And I can tell Eric has simplified a few of the drum arrangements to make them a little bit easier to play because, you know, he's not Phil. And again, that's no knock on Eric. It's just he's sitting in the seat that belongs to a guy who's a legendary drummer. But all things considered, Eric does a really fine job. I can't complain about any aspect of the band in terms of musicianship. So for this particular show, what do I give it? Well, Uncle Swan's going to give this one 7 3/4 tail feathers out of 10. I would rate it just a skosh higher if the set list had been more to my personal liking. As I mentioned, there were a few songs that I could have done without and would have replaced with other songs that I like better, but strictly my personal taste. In terms of musicianship and performance, show is really at least an 8 out of 10. So when Kansas comes to your town, you should definitely go see them in their current configuration because they're faithfully keeping the music and the legacy of Kansas alive. And that is a wonderful thing to see and hear. If you've enjoyed this review of Kansas in concert, I would really appreciate it ever so much if you'd tap that like button. And if you've seen Kansas recently, hit me up in the comments and let me know what you think of the current ensemble and how they're performing. Also, if you're new to this channel, do me a solid and subscribe. We talk about classic rock and related music, both old and new. And if you want more of this content, this is where to come to get it. I'll see you when I see you. Maybe at a concert venue here in Las Vegas, or perhaps elsewhere. Certainly here on the tube of you. Until we hang together again, please be well and do well by the people around you. And I'm always going to ask, is there gas in the car? Yes, there's gas in the car.